In 1990, Serie A was the most powerful league in the world. Maradona's Napoli, Milan's Dutch Kings, Inter's Germans, Juventus with Baggio. Everyone thought the Scudetto already belonged to one of them. But on May the 19th, 1991, a different team stood as champions of Italy. Sampdoria, a club built on brotherhood, patience and impossible dreams. This is their story. Roberto Mancini and Gianluca Vialli, one of the most iconic partnerships in Italian football. Together, they would lead Sampdoria to the greatest moment in the club's history. But the story of it all begins years earlier. In 1979, Sampdoria found their architect, Paolo Mantovani, an oil businessman who had fallen in love with Sampdoria, and Mantovani made his ambitions clear. At the time, it sounded almost impossible. Sampdoria were not one of the traditional powers of Italian football. But the club began to move forward, and in 1982, Sampdoria secured promotion back to Serie A. And over the course of Sampdoria's first 4 years, several star names arrived, including Liam Brady, Trevor Francis, and Graham Souness. But the recruitment was also focused on bringing in top young Italian talent. In 1982, a 17-year-old Roberto Mancini arrived from Bologna for a reported $2.2 million after scoring 9 goals in his first season in Serie A at just 16. Even as a teenager, Mancini attracted interest from top several clubs, including AC Milan. One story claims Milan even attempted to sign him but sent the contract to the wrong address. Whatever the truth, Sampdoria had landed a major coup. While in 1984, a 19-year-old Gianluca Vialli was signed from Cremonese. By 1985, the team finished 4th in the league, and Sampdoria achieved their first major success. They won the Coppa Italia. In the first leg at the San Siro, Graham Souness scored a decisive goal to give Sampdoria the advantage. Then in the return leg in Genoa, goals from Roberto Mancini from the penalty spot and Gianluca Vialli sealed a 2-1 victory.
Vialli.
Sampdoria had won their first major trophy, the first of the Mantovani era. Expectations were high in the following season, but the campaign proved disappointing, as Sampdoria finished 12th. But perhaps the biggest change came in 1986, when the club made a managerial switch. The Yugoslav coach, Vujadin Boskov, arrived in Genoa. Boskov had previously played for Sampdoria in the early 60s, and during his managerial career had already won La Liga with Real Madrid in 1980 and reached the European Cup final the following year. Boskov brought discipline and experience to a squad that was still growing. Around him, a talented group of players was beginning to take shape in Genoa. At the heart of it were 2 young forwards, Roberto Mancini and Gianluca Vialli, soon known as the Goal Twins. By 87-88 season, Sampdoria were again among the strongest sides in Italy, finishing 4th in Serie A and sealing the Coppa Italia once again. Having never won silverware before Mantovani's arrival, Sampdoria now had 2 trophies in 4 seasons. They were becoming a force to be reckoned with in Italian football. Sampdoria's Coppa Italia triumph earned them an entry into the European Cup Winners' Cup. At the start of the season, Sampdoria were pushing near the top of the league, with Gianluca Vialli and Roberto Mancini combining brilliantly in attack. From October to March, they lost just 2 of 21 league matches, climbing to 3rd. But their challenge faded in March and April, and ended up finishing 5th. In Europe, however, Sampdoria continued to thrive. They reached the Cup Winners' Cup final to face Johan Cruyff's FC Barcelona. Sampdoria got off to the worst possible start. Just 4 minutes into the match, Gary Lineker crossed for Julio Salinas to put Barcelona ahead. With 11 minutes remaining, Barcelona struck again to seal the trophy. It proved a step too far for the evolving Sampdoria side, but the season would still end with another chance for silverware. Sampdoria once again reached the Coppa Italia final, this time facing Diego Maradona's Napoli. The first leg in Naples saw Napoli take a narrow 1-0 victory, leaving Sampdoria with work to do ahead of the return leg, which would not be played at their home ground but in Cremona. What followed would become one of the great nights in Sampdoria's history.
Victor aggancia bene, mette in mezzo Vialli, colpo di testa, gol! Gran gol di Vialli! Mancini, si coordina Mancini, parte il cross, Cerezo, gol! Gol della Sampdoria, 2-0 di Torino, Cerezo.
Sampdoria had overturned the deficit, 4-0 victory. The Coppa Italia was theirs once again. Heading into the 89-90 season, Sampdoria added another key piece to the attack, signing winger Attilio Lombardo from Cremonese. Lombardo would become a crucial third piece of attacking threat alongside Mancini and Vialli. Once again, Sampdoria progressed strongly in the Cup Winners' Cup, eventually reaching the semi-final where they faced Arsene Wenger's Monaco, a side that included a young George Weah and Ramon Diaz. In the first leg, Monaco took the lead through Weah, but Vialli struck twice to give Sampdoria the advantage before Diaz equalised late. In the return leg, in Genoa,
Mancini, dentro, Catanezze, Nercovod, gol! Sulle tribune. Parte il lancio d'esterno di pari, Mancini, Carboni, Dossena, Carboni, ci succede regolare. Da Carboni, tira dalla parte opposta, arriva Lombardo, gol! 2-0 per la Sampdoria.
Sampdoria in the final once again. Their opponents would be Anderlecht, who had knocked out Barcelona earlier in the competition. Final played in Gothenburg was tense and closely contested, eventually going to extra time. And when the breakthrough finally came, it came for Sampdoria.
Mancini parte il gol! E gol ancora di Vialli! Gol! Gianluca Vialli! Grande azione della Sampdoria!
With that, Sampdoria were the 1990 European Cup Winners' Cup winners. The team that just 8 years earlier had been playing in Serie B had now won their 4th trophy. It was also part of an Italian sweep in European finals that year, as AC Milan and Juventus lifted the European Cup and the UEFA Cup respectively. There was little doubt Serie A had become the most dominant league in world football. After the European triumph the previous spring, belief around Sampdoria had changed. President Mantovani was no longer speaking about progress, he was speaking about the title. Manager Boskov shared that belief. His team had matured together and he knew the pieces were now in place. Then came the 1990 World Cup, a home tournament that wounded the pride of Sampdoria stars. Vialli was eclipsed by Scudetto in the tournament. Victories only appeared in the third place playoff against England. And Paolo and Mancini did not feature at all. The experience stung. Vialli, particularly frustrated, called Mantovani and asked for an extra week holiday to clear his head. Such was the father-son relationship between president and players that he knew he would be heard. But Vialli made a promise in return, grant him his time off, and he would make sure Sampdoria won the Scudetto that year. The four returned to training more determined than ever. Under Boskov, Sampdoria lined up in a classic 4-4-2 with rotation in a couple of positions. In goal stood the young and excellent Gianluca. Team captain Luca Pellegrini missed large parts of the season through long-term injury, but Catanec stepped in reliably at the back, alongside the dependable Mancini and Lana, with the Tsar himself, World Cup winner, Victories, marshalling the defence. In midfield, Parry sat deep as the playmaker, supported by a rotating cast who all proved decisive when called upon. On the left, Dossena handled things for most of the campaign, while Attilio Lombardo brought direct attacking play down the right. And up front, the legendary goal twins finished it all off. Gianluca Vialli would miss the opening 7 games of the season, but it would hardly matter. Sampdoria burst out the blocks. Their biggest statement came in game week 7 at the San Siro against Arrigo Sacchi's AC Milan. A moment of brilliance from Tonino Cerezo sealed a famous victory. By mid-November, Sampdoria were unbeaten and sitting top of Serie A. And with Vialli now back alongside Roberto Mancini, Sampdoria's famous goal twins were reunited. In game week 9 against Napoli, both would strike double in a brilliant victory.
Gap there for Vialli, now he has a chance to send the ball over, and error in defence once again, there's a header! And it's a goal for Sampdoria. Mancini has scored. Straight to Makalichenko. Here's Vialli. Oh yes, Vialli scores. Forward. Here's Mancini. And it's a fourth for Sampdoria. And a magnificent strike from Mancini.
But the following week, Sampdoria's unbeaten run came to an end. Frustrating Derby della Lantana defeat to Genoa. That Derby defeat proved costly. In the next 6 matches they drew 3 and lost 2, but they did manage to win one important victory. In a home game against Inter, Vialli opened the scoring, bursting through the defence before smashing in a half volley. Inter responded after the break. But in the final 10 minutes, Sampdoria took control. Vialli restored the lead from the penalty spot, before Mancini sealed a big win over their title contenders. Even so, Sampdoria's form has dropped them to 3rd in the table. The difficult spell finally ended with a victory over Roma in January the 23rd. The win sparked a remarkable turnaround, with Sampdoria winning 6 successive matches on a row, followed by a draw. By March, Samp were back on top, and it would prove to be a huge month for them. They had also progressed in the Cup Winners' Cup, defeating Kaiserslautern and Olympiacos to reach the quarter-finals, where Legia Warsaw awaited. And in the Coppa Italia, they were preparing to face Napoli over 2 legs in the semi-final, raising the possibility of a remarkable treble. But in Europe, the campaign was beginning to unravel. A defeat followed by a draw at home meant Sampdoria would not retain their trophy. With Europe gone, their focus returned to the Scudetto race. Next came Milan. After a tense first half, Sampdoria began to impose themselves after the break.
Maldini forward, followed across by Barresi. That's great play by Mancini. Down he goes. Maldini was the challenging player, and the penalty kick from Mancini. Look at the way he goes past Barresi, strides into the box, goes down as he's challenged by Maldini. Oh, that's calmly taken by Vialli. Sampdoria take the lead. Cutting it through the middle. Supporting play with Mancini. A great play by Mancini. He scored a second for Sampdoria.
2-0 victory over Milan was followed by a comfortable 3-0 win away at Pisa. That result set up another crucial meeting with Napoli. Sampdoria had just lost to them in the first leg of the Coppa Italia semi-final, and now faced 2 decisive home games. In the league, they produced a stunning performance, beating Napoli 4-1. Cerezo opened the scoring, Vialli struck twice, and Lombardo added another. It would also prove to be Diego Maradona's final appearance for Napoli, before failing a drug test and leaving Italy. Days later, Sampdoria completed the turnaround in the Coppa Italia, securing a 2-1 aggregate win, sending them through to the final against Roma. 2 draws and 2 wins followed in the league before, in game week 31, came the defining match of the season, away to Inter. As Sampdoria prepared for the clash, the manager, Boskov, remained characteristically calm. Football is simple, but it's difficult to play simple. Victory would open a 5-point lead at the top of the table. What followed would become one of the most dramatic games in Italian football history.
Oh, brilliantly saved! No. Oh, it's got to Berti! And again, Pagliuca. The linesman had his flag up. They have been having the run of midfield, but Vialli with Cerezo making a good run, and Dossena is there as well! Would you believe it? Here comes Mateus. Oh, and he saved it! Lombardo, it's round the goalkeeper, it's hit the post! Vialli's still waiting in the middle. Here he is, and it's off the line! In years to come, people will be saying, I was here, I was at that game. Grown men, hardened football watchers, are scarcely able to turn their eyes to this, and surely it's two this time. It is! The somersault of celebration from Gianluca Vialli.
A draw away to Torino set up the stage. Sampdoria would have the chance to win the title at home against Lecce. Nearly a decade this team had been built patiently under Mantovani, 90 minutes from history. And when it came quickly. Cerezo opened the scoring. Mancini added a second. And before half-time, Gianluca Vialli made sure of it. And when the final whistle blew, it was done. On the 19th of May, 1991, Sampdoria became champions of Italy for the first time. Gianluca Vialli finished as top goalscorer in Serie A. And the city of Genoa erupted in blue and white joy. It was the pinnacle, the impossible made real. Every high has its low, and just days later, Sampdoria were beaten by Roma over 2 legs in their Coppa Italia final. A sharp come down, but not enough to dim what they had already achieved, because that summer still belonged to them. And in Genoa, their celebration carried on, the joy untouched. But as the summer faded, so did the euphoria. What remained was something close to a hangover. The new season began with expectation, pressure, and Europe. And it showed. Sampdoria lost 6 of their first 11 games and hovered around relegation, but the team showed character. And they went on a 15-game unbeaten run.
And it's Mancini. And still Lombardo. No offside. And is it going to be number 3 for Vialli? The goal is open.
Clawing their way back to a respectable 6th place finish. In Europe, they were unstoppable. After beating Rosenborg and Honvéd, they entered the brand new group stage, the very first experiment in what would become the Champions League the following year. They defeated the reigning European Cup holders, Red Star Belgrade, home and away.
Vialli I Vasiljevic 2-0. 2-0 za Sampdoria. Luca Vialli. Lasciato a Vialli per Mancini. Mancini e le gol 3-1 per la Sampdoria. Grandissima giocata dei due gemelli del gol Vialli e Mancini.
And topped the group and marched straight to the final. Wembley awaited. Opponents, Johan Cruyff's Barcelona dream team. Neither side had ever won Europe's greatest prize. Whoever lifted that trophy would write their name into history. But the build-up for Samp was uneasy. Rumours swirled, Vialli heading to Juventus and coach Boskov on his way out. The magic felt fragile. Koeman struck it perfectly. 1-0, Barcelona won. Sampdoria's dream died in the cruelest way.
Final del partido, el Barcelona campeón de Europa.
Sam's like a beautiful girl that everyone wants to kiss, Boskov once said. This was always a story of family. That 1991 team grew up together at the club. They shared years, their unspoken understanding. That's what turned the improbable into the unforgettable. They dared to believe, defied every odd. And for one shining moment, Sampdoria stood for football as it should be. Pure, passionate, possible even for the small ones. That version of Samp, a modest club holding on to its core of brilliant talents and building to the very top, feels impossible now. The modern game doesn't allow it. That's why the Sampdoria years remain so precious. They tug at the nostalgic strings in every football's heart. The twilight came swiftly. After Wembley, key figures drifted away, and the era faded further with the sudden death of President Paolo Mantovani on October 1993, a profound loss that struck the soul of the club. Mancini would later say he would never have left while Mantovani lived. Talented names passed through the club during the 90s, and Samp lifted the Coppa Italia again in 93-94. But Mancini departed for Lazio in 97, and by the end of the 98-99 season, Samp were relegated, and the years that followed never matched the heights. But some stories have a way of finding their way back. In the summer of 2021, Wembley welcomed another final. Italy against England for the European Championship. Roberto Mancini, now the Azzurri coach, led his side to victory on penalties. The release was immense. On the staff were familiar faces from 1991, Tilio Lombardo, Fausto Parri, and standing with Mancini as chief delegate, Gianluca Vialli. That embrace after the final held everything. Lifelong friendships, the shared hurt from the same pitch in 1992, a dream finally fulfilled together. For those who knew the full story, it wasn't only Italy winning. It felt like Sampdoria had returned to Wembley one more time and finally found the joy that slipped away decades earlier. Vialli left us far too soon in January 2023 after facing his illness with the same quiet dignity he always had. But the spirit he helped shape, the loyalty, the unbreakable trust among those of 1991 teammates, lived on. It was there in every second that moment on the pitch, and it lives on still. A reminder of what the 1991 team that truly created something lasting beyond trophies or time. Samp dared the impossible once, and in every story still told about that golden team, it dares again.